The emergence of rage games in the mid-2000s marked a unique shift in the gaming industry and set forth new ideas for what it meant to be a difficult game. Of course, rage-inducing games had been around for decades at this point, whether it be coin-devouring arcade machines made extra difficult to incentivize players to spend just one more quarter, or games like Mega Man on the NES pushing some of the earliest gamers to their absolute limits. Video games have been providing intense challenges to players since their inception. In 2007, however, two separate projects would release that could arguably be considered responsible for creating the modern rage bait genre: Kaizo Mario World and I Wanna Be the Guy. Both games cranked up the difficulty to a ridiculous extent. Beyond intensely difficult obstacles to overcome, these games also included traps that most players would only know about if they had already seen it before, creating plenty of room for mind-numbing frustration. These projects amassed large amounts of clout among avid masochistic gamers at the time, and today stand as legendary pieces of internet gaming history. Thus, a space was created for games whose main goal was to say "fuck you" to the person playing them. Fast forward to December 6th, 2017, and a niche little indie game titled Getting Over It with Bennett Foddy would find itself for sale on the Steam store. Before diving into the game, it's important to discuss the man behind Getting Over It, Bennett Foddy himself. At the time of this game's release, Foddy was no stranger to creating interesting experiences to say the least, with his first title Q-Wop in 2008 being a quirky and frustrating running simulator in which you controlled the runner's calves and thighs. Beyond game design, Foddy is an accomplished philosopher who has worked at both Oxford and Princeton. When the time came to create Getting Over It, Foddy set out to make a game that hurts you. But it's also so much more than that. The game provides space for a philosophical, nuanced discussion on the social scape of the internet and the intrinsically human response we have to challenges. It challenges the gluttony of the internet and stands to create an experience that won't easily be consumed and quickly forgotten. In recent years, many games have been released with clear inspiration tied to Getting Over It. Foddy managed to create an influential experience through Getting Over It, a subversive masterpiece in the rage bait genre that brilliantly employs various frustrating yet undeniably charming elements of game design to create a philosophical discussion on human nature and the essence of what it means to get back up and try again. What exactly is Getting Over It? Well, at its core, it's a simple game. There's just the playable character sitting in a pot with a large hammer, Bennett Foddy as an extra diegetic narrator who intermittently speaks to the player, and a big-ass mountain. The objective is pretty straightforward. Just climb up the mountain, using the hammer to miraculously leverage yourself and a giant cauldron around countless inanimate obstacles. The game's rules don't manage to be particularly complex either. As long as you can maneuver the hammer a certain way, you can carve any path through the mountain that you see fit. Well, there is one more rule actually. This rule sets the entire tone of the game and defines the experience. That rule being, if you fall down the mountain, it's on you to make up all the progress. This sets the stage for a uniquely frustrating game that dangles progress in your face and then snatches it away from you the second you start feeling too comfortable. Despite the academic and philosophical approach this reading of the game is taking, it is also important to recognize just how much this game screws with and taunts the player.
Going down the road feeling bad. I'm going down the road feeling bad. Going down the road feeling bad, and I ain't going to be treated this way.
This game released during a time in which Twitch streamers and YouTubers were starting to set the standard for which games were culturally relevant at the time, and Foddy knew that Getting Over It would do well in this landscape. After all, it was easy to see the appeal in watching your favorite streamer throw a tantrum over falling down the mountain. The potential for clippable moments was incredibly high for this game, with Foddy even predicting the game's eventual internet fame.
Now I know, most likely you're watching this on YouTube or Twitch, while some dude with 10 million views does it for you, like a baby bird being fed chewed up food.
Foddy uses this stage he's created for himself to have a discussion with the people playing and viewing the game, asking them to reflect on how the internet mindlessly consumes entertainment. I could sum it up here, but I think it's best to let Foddy speak for himself.
Over time, we've poured more and more refuse into this vast digital landfill that we call the internet. It now vastly outnumbers and outweighs the things that are fresh and untainted and unused. When everything around us is cultural trash, trash becomes the new medium, the lingua franca of the digital age. And you can build culture out of trash. But only trash culture. B games, B movies, B music, B philosophy. Maybe this is what digital culture is. A monstrous mountain of trash, the ash heap of creativity's fountain. A landfill with everything we ever thought of in it. Grand, infinite, and unsorted. There's 3D models of breakfast, Gen X's fanfic novels, scan magazines, green screen Shia LaBeouf, banned snuff scenes on LiveLeak. Facebook's got lifelike bots with unbranded adverts and candid shots of Kanye and Taylor Swift mashups, car crash epic failed GIFs, Russian dashcam vids, discussions of McRibs, discarded, forgotten, unrecycled, muddled, rotten, untitled. Everything's fresh for about 6 seconds, until some newer thing beckons, and we hit refresh. And there's years of persevering, disappearing into the pile, out of style, out of sight. In this context, it's tempting to make friendly content that's gentle, that lets you churn through it but not earn it. Why make something demanding if it just gets piled up in the landfill, filed in with the bland things?
Foddy manages to craft a uniquely demanding experience through the game's control scheme. The player interacts with the world entirely through using the mouse to guide the hammer's movement. The hammer matches the movement and acceleration of the mouse, and as the player gets comfortable with the movement, the line between where the mouse ends and the hammer begins starts to blur. Such an unconventional control scheme takes time to get used to, and much of the early experience playing the game involves slowly figuring out how to navigate with the hammer through repeated trial and error. As you climb higher and higher up the mountain, new challenges will stretch the limits of your ability to move precisely with the hammer. Rapid movements, stressful jumps, and instantaneous flicks are only a handful of ways Foddy expects you to reach the summit. Eventually, though, with the game's mounting challenges and the rate in which it asks the player to develop new skills, a big fall is bound to happen. The second pillar of frustration comes from the game's saving mechanics, or lack thereof. The game constantly autosaves, and when you quit and come back, you'll end up right where you left off. There's zero room for cheating with saves in this game. When you fall, it's on you to make it all the way back up to where you were, surpassing all of the previous challenges you overcame once more just to have the chance at more progress. With such a brutal punishment for error, the game constantly creates situations for the player to suffer a massive loss of progress. No upwards movement is guaranteed in this game, and the stress of falling and subsequent frustration of doing so only rises further as the player climbs higher up the mountain. The frustrating elements of this game ultimately build a narrative about the nature of rising, falling, and rising back up again. A procedural rhetoric is created through the employment of frustrating game systems, urging the player to continue the struggle towards the summit, even if it's just to say, "Screw you, Bennett, I made it." In saying that, though, Foddy has won, and so has the player. He started the conversation he wants to have with the player, about difficulty, about digital culture, and about trying again. In one of the final narrations during the climax of the ascent, Foddy discusses the role of the player and the gap that exists between them and the game. He dissects the point of view and reveals what the player is truly controlling.
Have you thought about who you are in this? Are you the man in the pot, Diogenes? Are you his hand? Are you the top of his hammer? I think not. Where your hand moves, the hammer may not follow, nor the man, nor the man's hand. In this you're his will, his intent, the embodied resolve in his uphill ascent.
And, in that moment, Foddy has wrapped the game in a nice bow right before sending the player off. This bit of dialogue connects nearly everything he's been speaking about for the entire game together. In a world where our social and digital landscape has prioritized the creation of endless, garbage content meant solely for as much reckless consumption as possible in the shortest amount of time, there's something real and meaningful in being frustrated. People consume things that are easy, because in the constant cycle of consumption, there isn't much room to pause and reflect on something that makes you feel anything other than good. There's a disillusionment with reality that occurs as this cycle normalizes itself more and more within people's lives, but experiences like getting over it serve as sobering reminders of what it means to experience a moment. The experience of climbing up the mountain is incredibly real. The frustration of falling, the triumph of pushing through a seemingly impossible obstacle, and the reprieve of finally making it all the way to the top culminate in an experience that isn't soon to be forgotten. It reminds us of what it means to have will, and shows us that in a world constantly attempting to streamline and optimize, there's room for frustration, anger, and everything else that makes the human spirit a unique, beautiful, and flawed being.